It was the band for God and country, really patriotic, led by the flag for which we stand. Blue for the mind that seeks the good and true, red for our progress in the game, white for the glory of a heart that's pure, bright with an ever-shining flame. Alma Mater, we hail, God give us and great success. With truth and love will conquer all, for God our land and SFS. Alma Mater, we hail, God give us and great success. With truth and love will conquer all, for God our land and SFS. With truth and love, let us unite and be true to our glorious college name. High on the hill, a beggar like a sheep, leading our children on to faith. Unshot to glory is a message world, spread truth and Nagpur far and wide. Loyal to the hands who reigns on guidance, teacher and pupil side by side. Alma Mater, we hail, God give us and great success. The truth and love will conquer all, for God our land and SFS. Alma Mater, we hail, God give us and great success. With truth and love will conquer all, for God our land and SFS.
Steve Jobs once quoted that great things in business are never done by one person, they are done by a team of people. A very good evening to one and all present here. On behalf of the management, Principal Dr. K.T. Thomas Sir and staff of St. Francis de Sales College, Nagpur, Maharashtra, Central India, I, Saini Raut, student of BSc second year and your host for the day, welcome you all to the fourth day of our one-week international conference on global collaboration in science, technology, education, mathematics and humanities to advance the frontiers of knowledge and innovation. Today, we will be hearing about many informative things including internet, history of medical sciences, social impact of pandemic, businesses, etc. To start with, we have today with us our first guest speaker, Dr. Prantik Banerjee. Sir is an Associate Professor of Department of English and former IQAC Coordinator, Hislop College, Nagpur. He has successfully guided his college in getting A grade from NAC Bangalore and Heritage status from UGC New Delhi. He has been a keynote speaker and resource person at several national and international conferences. Sir is a member of Board of Studies, RTM Nagpur University. He is a PhD supervisor from RTMNU, a NAC expert, RUSA trainer, and a certified HRD trainer from TCS Bangalore. His publication includes 1 book, 3 anthologies, 7 book chapters, and 38 research papers in peer-reviewed journals. Sir is a published poet and short story writer. The Indian Express, Nagpur edition, and the Hitwada have published his articles. So today, Sir will guide us on the topic is the Internet, New Public Sphere, Democracy and Ideology of Technoculture. A note for the participants that if you have any questions, you can post them in YouTube chat box or in call message in Google Meet. It's an honor to listen to you, sir. So I humbly request you to take over the session. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Sayali. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Right. Thank you, Sayali, for somebody as young as you and a BSc student at that. You've done a very remarkable job in very confidently starting or kick-starting the whole session, and also telling us, letting us know that we have a rich repast, even though it's evening time. We have a rich fare with quite a number of speakers lined up and a variety of subjects who are going to speak on a variety of subjects. First of all, my profound gratitude to Dr. Katie Thomas, Principal of SFS College, as well as the organizing committee and the organizing team of this international conference, the 6-day international conference. I'm told that, well, Sayali told us that today is the 4th day, and I was just going through the brochure uh, where speakers from all walks of life and of different hues have already spoken on a rich variety, on a very eclectic range of subjects that have been covered in the last 3 days. So, keeping that in mind, and also perhaps most importantly, well, good evening, participants in India, those who have joined us on this platform, on this Google platform, and good morning, I suppose, or good morning or good afternoon to our guests or our meet friends, shall I say, MEET, who have joined us from the United States and I think from Italy as well. Um, since the program schedule looks more like a relay race, where every speaker is supposed to pass on the baton, and I have, I think, 4 speakers after me. So, without much ado, let me jump straight into my talk. Let me share my screen. Please confirm, is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Is the full screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Great. Fine. So we are all set to go. Friends, the topic of my talk today is the internet the new public sphere? And I'm going to examine the close, visible as well as invisible, intrinsic and organic relationship between democracy and social media. Well, to begin with, here are a few facts to chew on. You know, at the end of 1990, studies have shown that 4% of the world's population were using the internet. I mean, that was just the start of the internet revolution. So in the 1990s, barely 4% of the world's population were using the internet. Well, today, 2021 rather, it is 40%. Second, 90% of the internet searches that we do as netizens take place through Google. Facebook has more users than the population of any single country in the world. Something that we tend to actually, not realize. And that the next fact is something which is quite interesting, which is quite fascinating and very pivotal, very vital to my talk. And that is, there's this NGO named Freedom House, which sort of does a survey on the efficacy of democracy or the functioning of democracies every year. So they present an annual report on the basis of their study and analysis of, good governance or or lack of good governance, the protection of civil rights, freedom of expression, then citizenship, good citizenship, and on the basis of that and many other factors, they come out with an annual report which kind of looks at the pace at which democracy has either improved or perhaps declined or deteriorated than the previous years. And what it shows, therefore, is something very interesting. It shows that the percentage of countries, classified according to this report by Freedom House, as free, as partly free or not free at all, has remained the same since 1999, which means that for nearly 2 decades, basically, if one were to map the graph of democracy, then it wouldn't really show any spike. It wouldn't show any upward trend at all. This seems to suggest that, again, by the same survey house, what they also did was to survey all the elections that were held between the period of 2018 and 2020. And they found that 80% of all elections conducted during this 2-year period, including referendums in different parts of the world, they were marred by digital election interference. Clearly, the annual report, therefore, presented by Freedom House suggests that more and more there is a growing tendency that authoritarian actors across the world are growing bolder as major democracies, turn inward and seem to suggest that there is a decline. There is a decline in the average global freedom. For the 15th consecutive time in the last 15 years, there seems to be a decline in the average of global freedom index. What it also shows, what the survey also shows, or the report also tells, is that a growing number of governments are employing digital tactics to repress, political opponents, to muzzle voices of dissent and protest, to distort online media environments ahead of any elections. And I don't just mean the elections that President Trump recently lost. Now, these facts show just how embedded the internet is in our lives and how crucial a role it plays in the functioning of democracy. Friends, the internet has caused a paradigm shift from one-to-many communications to many-to-many communications. I mean, take, for example, simple acts. Now, we all are aware that simple acts like, tweaking an algorithm or prioritizing a hashtag can make news, information, or an opinion viral. And this paradigm shift, I feel, has radically impacted on the way we think of free speech, the way we think of democracy, and the way we define, or rather, we need to redefine what we mean by participatory politics. Clearly, this disturbing trend of the freedom index of countries across the globe, which has remained almost the same in the last 15 years, raises some fundamental questions about freedom of speech, privacy rights, profit making of internet big techs like Facebook, Google, and Amazon, the three giants, and of course, government regulation, government control. The internet, we realize, has become a contentious side of two opposite political positions. Two positions that can be seen as diametrically opposite to each other in its relation to democracy. One is, yes, there is a line of thought which suggests that, yes, the internet is an empowering agency. It is an enabling media. It is, a wonderful platform that allows people to inform, unite in completely new ways, in exponential ways, and also helps people across the world to fight for their rights and their freedom. But it is equally true and disturbing that the same platform or the same social media can be used for and has been used for propaganda, for populism and repression of democracy. And this has happened time and again. And I mean, I will be giving you citing a few examples as we go along. Also, we now know, and this is a recent happening, that more and more, a lot of these internet companies, including the three major giants that we talked about, Facebook, Google, and Amazon, are now also coming under legal and government uh, the legal and government scrutiny. Um, Only this January, as recently as in January, we saw how the US Capitol was stormed by a lynch mob, which was partly driven by far right social media, conspiracy theories, and also stirred on by the then President Donald Trump. Now, one of the immediate repercussions or an immediate consequence of what was clearly one of the most or rather forgettable events in the history of the United States was that one of the immediate repercussions was that at least 10, market dominating tech companies, they themselves took action through on the trafficking of content, by content moderation and even account suspension. And perhaps, the most news-making event of the year so far has been when Twitter and Facebook deplatformed former President Trump. I mean, who would have thought that trumping Trump would have been as ironical as this? Friends, we are living in an era of radical political, social, cultural, and economic uncertainties. To predict anything, even if you were a Nostradamus born again, to predict anything has become a far more risky affair than ever before. I mean, a few years back, pundits and political scientists, they told us that Brits would never vote to Brexit. Well, they did. Pundits and scientists also told us that the days of global pandemics were over thanks to the cutting edge transformation in medical sciences. Well, COVID-19 happened and locked down the world, and we still are experiencing it. Pundits and political scientists also told us that the internet would make it possible it would make democracies thriving and sustainable and improving, constantly improving. Well, now I don't think we are sure at all. We are sure at all about what is happening, particularly in the light of some of the events that have taken place in the United States. Well, when this shift, you could say, when Johann Gutenberg invented the movable press, printing press in the 1400s, people then thought that he had radically, and which is true, he had radically changed the channel of mass communication. Then when radio and television came along in the 1900s and in the 1940s, a similar revolution took place in the modes of communication, in the channels of transmission of news, information, and even ideas. And then came the 1990s, and in the 1990s, when the internet came, it was heralded as the black swan moment of the century. Now, this Eureka moment made digital revolution and its capacity to reach out to people exponentially greater than that achieved by newspapers, by radio or television in the previous eras. So today, I mean, yesterday's printing press is the internet. Today, yesterday's coffee houses are our hangouts. Today, yesterday's social lives are lived on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram with likes and followers. So today, anyone having access to the internet can put their thoughts or opinions out there in the public. And in a sense, therefore, the internet, you could say, is blurring the lines between the segregated spaces, the spaces that were traditionally segregated or separated, as what we used to call as private spaces and public spaces, or private spaces and the public sphere. Friends, with this ever increasing pervasiveness of the internet in our lives, it is, one very fundamental question crops up. A question that is related to the way we define, to the way we describe what people now call our network society. And the fundamental question is the internet a public sphere? Well, before we address that question, and I'll take some time to engage with that question a few minutes from now, let us look at what really do we mean by public sphere. The concept of public sphere is strongly connected. It is associated with the theory of Jürgen Habermas, the German philosopher and sociologist. In his book, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, the one that is on the slide, a book that he published in 1962, Habermas described the public sphere as simply as a social domain where public opinion is formed, circulated, and distributed. So for Habermas, the public sphere was what he called the bourgeois public sphere, because he was kind of tracing the growth or the trajectory of social spaces that came into being from the 18th century in Europe, where individuals gathered to discuss affairs of common public interest in town halls, lecture rooms, public libraries, and auditoriums. So these were traditionally, you could say, in the Habermasian sense, the public sphere, spaces where people talked, exchanged, discussed, debated, and circulated ideas, including ideas about civic liberties, freedom of expression, and good governance. Now, clearly, the nature and function of this sort of public sphere, was based upon the principles of European Enlightenment, the political theory that is the bedrock of European Enlightenment. So, it was based, this conception or the Habermasian conception of the public sphere was based on the celebrated principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Remember that, for much of the 18th century, the 17th and the 18th centuries, the public sphere was created to oppose. One of the functions for which the public sphere was created was to oppose absolutist monarchical regimes. However, if we go further back in time, if we go back in history, we do find that the public sphere or the public discussions that took place, the narratives of public discourse in these spaces were not really unprecedented. In fact, in ancient Greece, for example, when we think of Socrates held forth on subjects such as democracy, justice, freedom, and citizenship in a marketplace that the Greeks called agora, a public sphere where the Athenians assembled to discuss and debate issues of social concern and civic polity. So for Habermas, the public sphere is defined by four normative principles. What is there on your slide? One is equality, second is transparency, third is inclusivity, and rationality. So for Habermas, equality, transparency, inclusivity, and rationality, these were the founding principles or the bedrock or the cornerstones of what he defined as the public sphere. Now, there are two, we might say, taking from Habermas's conception of the public sphere, um, there are two fundamental questions that we might ask with regard to the role of the internet today. One, is the public sphere, is the internet, first of all, the public sphere? And if it is the public sphere, then is it the site of liberal democratic practices? Well, some social scientists, particularly those of a left-leaning ideology, like the Marxist thinker Jody Dean, the slide has her picture, they feel that, Jody feels that the internet is nothing like a public sphere. In fact, that is what she perhaps makes a bold and very radical statement in her book, Democracy and Other Neoliberal Fantasies, the image on the right side of your screen. And she argues that the reason why the net or the internet cannot be called a public sphere is because it does not adequately fulfill the norms of equality, transparency, inclusivity, and rationality. Those very norms prescribed by Habermas for defining democratic practice. In fact, Jody points out that the network public sphere is actually quite discriminatory and unjust in practice. Far from being inclusive, she argues that the cyberspace is racist and sexist, and it is largely dominated by what she calls according to her, it is largely dominated by young white male Americans and Europeans. It excludes and suppresses, therefore, the voices of women, ethnic and racial minorities, and other marginalized groups, including the working class people. So the internet as a public sphere, therefore, excludes and suppresses, the voices of all kind of minorities and marginalized groups. And in the last few years, studies on social media have shown, for example, if you consider any of the tools that social media has made available worldwide to us, Twitter, for example. So studies on the use of Twitter or the profile of people who tweet shows that the typical Twitter user in 2019 was someone between the age of 18 and 34, someone with a university degree, someone with a reasonable income, and therefore more and interestingly, I don't know why, but more likely to be single. So clearly, the internet, friends, according to some social historians and political thinkers such as Jody Dean, feel that the internet is a deeply stratified space. Is a deeply stratified space where virtual communities, even as they are formed, have hierarchies by age, ethnicity, and class, and gender. In India, too, not surprisingly, the internet is a space where we find online inequalities. I mean that when we talk about digital inequalities, meaning the digital haves and the have-nots, India again is an example of a space where online inequalities such as problems of internet access, poor connectivity, and not everyone having smartphones combines often. These online inequalities combine often with offline inequalities of language, religion, caste, class, and gender. So obviously, so long as there is a stratified society with such kind of fault lines, information inequality will exist. And as a result, some social scientists, including Jody Dean, argue that the internet has hardly realized the normative ideals of the public sphere, which was envisaged by Habermas. Now, in contrast to this group of social commentators who feel that the internet is not a public sphere because it suffers from a lack, because it is exclusionary in nature, there are also others, however, who believe that the internet is a public sphere. It is a public sphere, but and this is startling, but it suffers from an excess of inclusivity. That the net is a public sphere, but there is too much of inclusivity. I mean, these critics, therefore, or commentators, therefore, complain not against the lack, but an excess on the internet, that the internet is too much like the public sphere. They argue, and the reason they give is that that the cyberspace has been it's a free way of information that allows all kinds of people to express and circulate all kinds of opinions. So and there is an absence of therefore net literacy. You know, because all people are free to express anything and everything on the net, there is a lack of net literacy, and uh, therefore they say that you know that ideas and opinions are put on the internet increasingly by increasingly large number of people without having any purchase on either truth or on trust. So these critics argue that there is too much of equality, not lack or too less, but too much of equality and too much of inclusivity online. So when the you know when the net therefore allows everyone to express their opinion, then no one's opinions matter. So there's it's a sort of a Siberia. You know, they argue that this kind of a Siberia is founded on what one of the social commentators says is a nightmare of inclusion, one that breeds an illegitimacy of knowledge and a pornography of ideas. Now, what underlies both these positions, which I said were diametrically opposite, one of lack and the other of excess, is that despite being on opposite sides of the opinion spectrum, they both seem to advocate the need for greater control and regulation to stop the virtual public sphere from becoming anarchic. Now, this is interesting that paradoxically, then, the two contrary positions are actually wanting, they're desiring and authorizing the surveillance and monitoring of the internet public sphere. And what is the paradox? Well, in the process of asking for greater control and greater regulation by state actors or even non-state actors on the internet, they fundamentally seem to revoke the very norms of public sphere that Habermas felt was the most vital organ in the making of a democracy. I hope you see this paradox. Friends, when we talk about the internet, how can we not talk about social media and the many tools? The rise of blogs, social networking sites, Facebook, LinkedIn, microblogs like Twitter, Weibo, or Wikis, for example, and any content sharing sites such as YouTube or Flickr or Instagram. These have resulted in heated public discussions on the implications of the role of this media for liberal democracy. Once again, there are two sides to the coin. There are two sides to this issue. One, what one could say, are optimistic about the role of social in promoting and encouraging and fostering good liberal democratic principles, and on the other hand, there are on the opposite side of the spectrum are people who actually belie this kind of robust optimism that is that is argued. So, on the optimistic view is that social media is in fact it can be a radically new enhancer of freedom. These are people who, commentators who sort of celebrate techno euphoria. And riding on this wave of techno euphoria, they hail digital technology as the technology of liberation, as the technology of the people. Now, this kind of optimistic view of the social media as a radical enhancer of freedom seems to hold good, particularly if we recall, if we remember the events that happened in particularly in 2010 and 2011. I mean, we all remember. What comes to our mind is, the mass protests that erupted in countries like Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Syria, what we now call as the Arab Spring. Now, in each of these countries, long-serving autocrats were ousted from power. And in each of these countries, protesters used Facebook, Twitter to mobilize and rally against the government. So the internet seemed to have re-energized the public to be counted for, forcing governments to listen to the voice of the people. So this kind of the events of Arab Spring that happened in 2010 and 11 seem to therefore generate a lot of unbridled optimism in the power of Twitter and other instruments of social media. And it was felt that the internet in general, was democratizing. Well, I finally got it right. Democratizing, because they believe that social media works like a megaphone. It makes public voices of protest and dissent against repressive regimes, against authoritarian or autocratic governments. Difficult. It makes them difficult to muzzle or silence the voices of protest or voices of dissent. And so such cybertopians equate this unbridled optimism in the power of the social media as social media is equal to more democracy, which translates into more freedom. Once again, the optimistic, or rather the hyper-optimistic view of the empowering role of social media is sort of counterbalanced by a rather skeptical view, which seems to suggest that social media maintains the status quo. Remember what I said in the opening slide. One of the facts in the opening slide, that the share of countries that the NGO, that the annual report of Freedom House suggested, as free, partly free, and not free, has hardly changed, has hardly budged since 1999. Unfortunately, in the battle between networks and hierarchies, digital hierarchies, the hierarchies seem to be winning more often than not. One reason surely is that, that autocrats have become as skillful as at using the internet and social media as activists. It's an open secret that government hold large amounts of data on their citizens. They use the internet and mobile phones to track down opposition leaders. They restrict access to the internet, sometimes shutting it down, and employ armies of people to vet and skew the conversations that are happening online. So we all are witness to the reality that, disinformation, what we call fake news, and propaganda, like conspiracy theories disseminated online, are increasingly poisoning the public sphere. When the pandemic broke out, remember how there were as many conspiracy theories as there were as people with political ideologies. Conspiracy theories such as, that the pandemic was because of the 5G spectrum, believe me, I mean, this theory as that the pandemic was as a result of 5G actually led to a lot of people pulling down telecommunication towers en masse. So such kind of conspiracy theories do win the trust as well as the ear and the trust of people. Friends, while events of 2010 and 11, such as the Arab Spring that I just referred to, highlight the positive role played by the internet in toppling dictatorships and keeping democracies alive and kicking in some parts of the world, one can give even one can give a number of opposite examples to show the less optimistic and more skeptical view about the role of social media. Events in 2019, for example, have confirmed that the internet can also be used to disrupt democracies. Uh, Facebook founder and chief executive Mark Zuckerberg testified, remember, in two hearings before the Congress about his company's role in the in the Cambridge Analytica scandal. One in which it was revealed that Facebook had exposed data of nearly 90 million users for political exploitation, for political manipulation of elections. So the case is a reminder really of how personal information is increasingly being employed to influence electoral outcomes. And then, of course, the banning of the US president by Twitter also points to the disturbing ways in which big techs have come to dominate and shatter the public sphere. Well, I think, yeah, I'll take 5 minutes more. So when you're thinking of, social media and its role in protecting democracy, in being a true public sphere in the Habermasian sense, is that it? Well, recent digital commentators have talked about how social media is being transformed, or rather, the activism, the increase in protests, agitations, rallies, and morchas online have moved from offline to online and has resulted in what we call from activism to slacktivism. This is a term that was coined by Dwight Ozard and Fred Clark way back in 1995. And it's a rather, it's a portmanteau word, of course, but rather it's a rather pejorative word because it kind of it combines slackness, the slacktivist, the slack in slacktivist, of course, means laziness with activism. And one of the most important social commentators and writers of today's time, Evgeny Morozov, for example, says that he describes slacktivism as a feel-good online activism, having zero political or social impact, which of course is rather harsh. But what he says is that slacktivism is the ideal type of activism for a lazy generation. And goes on to say that why bother with sit-ins and the risk of arrest, police brutality, or torture if one can be loud campaigning in the virtual space. What he really means is that for slacktivists, online activists, they seem to think that why risk facing water cannons, pellets, and gas on the streets when you can join forces online. So when we think of online activism and their role in protecting or consolidating or strengthening democracy, studies have shown that online movements usually have lasting impact only if they generate traditional political activities such as street protests or the establishment of parties, which means that for an online activism to gain ground and rather to gain momentum, it has to come onto the ground itself. So what do we actually infer? What do we draw our conclusions from these extreme positions about the role of the internet and the function of social media? Can we call, for example, the 2011 protests and revolutions, Twitter and Facebook revolutions, or do we need to redefine what we mean by revolution as we are trying to redefine the very concept of public sphere? So far as the Tahrir Square political protests against or the Occupy Wall Street protests in Zuccotti Park are concerned, once again, data on media usage, and this is empirical research, the data on media usage suggests that demonstrators did make use of social media proactively, But they were also, throughout the protest, throughout the agitation, they were constantly connected, and they were raising awareness through traditional methods of communication, such as phones and face-to-face talks and discussions and discussions at the streets and the public houses and public and the town council halls. So the study seems to illustrate that digital media was not as central. It doesn't deny the role of digital media, but it does seem to suggest that that digital media was not as central or pivotal to protesters on the ground as supporters of Twitter revolution, who were calling it as Twitter revolution, were tended to hyperbolize it. Usage data also, raises questions. For example, can meaningful political debate be based on 140 character short messages? I mean, short text, the way that the ones that we use on Twitter, for example, may actually end up inviting simplistic arguments. They may simplify arguments and use very simplistic logic, and sometimes no logic. And then these messages become viral, only to help advertisers on social media to go laughing all the way to the banks. So some social commentators therefore point out that commonly held notion of Arab Spring as a Twitter revolution, as a Facebook revolution, is nothing more than an urban myth. Some of the things that I shared with you today are from the books that you see on the slide. What clearly, the narratives in these 4 books seem to demonstrate is that social media, the tools of social media such as Twitter and Facebook, are commercial sites driven by profit. I mean, big techs are, after all, owned by big corporations, and these are companies, with hundreds of millions in their thrall, have the power to control what you could say, what the 3 most crucial levers of modern times, and they are data, attention of the public, and the popular narratives of democracy. So Twitter, for example, privileges, economically powerful actors over the everyday users, thereby, promoting a class-structured public sphere. So if you are a large company with a huge advertising budget, then it is easy for you to buy attention on Twitter. But if you are an everyday user, which most of us are, without an advertising budget and without much time, you will, in contrast, have a much harder time promoting your tweets and your accounts. For that matter, no, not everyone is a Shashi Tharoor either. So how do I wrap up? Well, we do say that when going back to Habermas, the role of public sphere is becoming an increasing topic of heated debate and discussion, whether it nurtures communication, whether it fosters democracy. It is therefore important to test how communicative and democratic Twitter, Facebook, and other instruments of social media are. I said it has become increasingly difficult or impossible to make predictions, but do I dare you to make some predictions? Between now, let us say, that is 2021 and 2030, how will the use of technology by citizens, civil rights activists, and governments affect democracy and the public sphere? Will it empower or disempower people participation and freedom of speech? Will the public sphere turn into a virtual privatized sphere, or will it remain an open democratized sphere? Will social media serve as a gateway to represent regimes and autocrats, or will it act as gatekeepers for liberal democracies to work and to thrive? Friends, as I said, we live in very uncertain times. We live in pandemic times, and pandemic times often can lead can lead to pandemoniums. It can lead to anarchy. But we all are optimists, and we do believe that while social media will continue to wield more power and it will have more reach in the coming years, social media is to realize and fulfill the weighty responsibility of ensuring that these platforms serve the public good. So securing internet freedom, equality, and access for we the people is fundamental to protecting democracy as a whole. So while your tweet may be just another voice in today's boundaryless, seamless digital public sphere, that tweet, when joined by thousands of others, can have and shall have the impact of a deafening uproar and be the protector of democracy in its truest sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It was indeed a very informative and helpful session. Your ability to acquire desired skills by identifying and utilizing available resources is very inspiring. We have learned a lot from you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Zayali.
Proceeding further, I would like to introduce to you all the second guest speaker of the day, Dr. Nilanko Mallik. He is an associate professor at Selinus University of Sciences and Literature, Italy. He was the head department of English, Navanalanda Group of Schools, Kolkata, India. He was faculty at University of People, USA. Dr. Nilanko Mallik sir is an educator and academic author. He has experience in teaching English literature and language to both native and non-native speakers at several institutes of repute. His research interests are in the fields of neurolinguistics and Shakespeare in performance. Sir also heads a performance group, Shakespeare Youth Performance. Besides teaching and writing, he is interested in making short films and web series and enjoys playing piano. Sir will give his insights on the topic traversing the history of medical sciences through English literature. A note for the participants that if you have any questions, you can post them in the YouTube chat box or in the in-call messages in Google Meet. So I extend a hearty welcome to you, sir. Now I would humbly request sir to take over our session and give your insights. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I hope my audio is clearly audible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So let me get started right away. And let me start by actually turning a few of your past tenses to present tenses. I am still employed as head of the department at Navanalanda, and I am employed, I work at University of the People, US. So right now I am in India, so let me wish everyone a very good evening from India. So as was told, my presentation is going to be traversing the history of medical sciences through English literature. Let me start sharing the screen. All right, so it's really a very innovative week-long conference that SFS College has organized, because this conference is about global collaborations in our presentation talks, which relate to, well, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approaches. And it is obviously something which is felt to be the need of the hour. We are no longer restricted to studying subjects which are only restricted to, well, a limited point of view. We need to think out of the box. So in this presentation, I would basically be telling you of this collaboration which has been happening through the centuries, a collaboration between English literature and medical sciences through the centuries, down the ages, one which is not so popularly known or recognized, but it is obviously very interesting. So let's hope I can make it interesting for you. So I would restrict myself in this presentation to talking about a few English literature texts, because if I talk about texts which are in translation, then, well, it would extend to several weeks and I would be banned from all future conferences, and I certainly don't want that to happen. So we are going to look at some Anglo-Saxon documents which are related to healing. We are going to look at Reginald Scott. We are going to look at, well, the very popular drama Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet. And we are going to talk about Frankenstein. We are going to talk about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and also Dracula. So why should we talk about all of them? And why exactly does English literature even talk about the advances in medical sciences of the times? Well, basically, as you must have understood, the study of literature is a study of almost all the subjects, because all subject matters have been treated by authors down the ages. The uses of medicine and medical sciences therefore are discussed in texts which are originally written in the English language. Okay, let's start by talking about a few Anglo-Saxon documents. Now, the Anglo-Saxons were a group of invaders basically who came to England, and they had their reign till 1066 when the French took over. And before the Anglo-Saxons, there were the Celts who were living in England. There were the Romans who were living in England for a brief amount of time also. So the Celtic culture and a lot of other ancient cultures, they basically understood the microcosmic world, that is the world of men, to be governed by macrocosmic forces, that is the world of nature. So think about it. Well, you are back in the ancient times when you are dwelling in caves and you have just come out of caves and you're looking at the world, and you are obviously alarmed, you are awed by all the forces of nature, and you feel that they have got something to do with your life as well. Well, often nature was malevolent. They didn't really regard nature as benevolent all the time, because nature would harm them a lot of times. So the earliest practitioners of medicine, well, were not what we understand to be doctors now. So right now, when we talk about doctors, when we think about medicine, we obviously think about tablets, capsules, injections, therapy. But in those times, well, the earliest practitioners of medicines were herbologists, and the earliest medicines were the herbs. And magic and medicine were not so different from each other. So magic would be used to heal and harm, and well, if it healed, it would be acting as medicine. So we have got legends of Merlin the magician, who was basically a Celtic legend, but who was misunderstood to be an Anglo-Saxon because of Middle English period historians who mistook him. And he is supposed to have helped another legendary figure, King Arthur. So stories about Merlin talk about his uncanny abilities to wield nature. And let's talk about a few Anglo-Saxon documents which talk about healing through herbs. I have mentioned a few sources, so if you get time, then you are welcome to look them up for your study. So there were 9 herbs basically, and some of these are still popular even today. So I have given the scientific names of the herbs as they are known now. So there were 9 herbs which were used to heal. Okay, and these are the 9 herbs that are mentioned in Anglo-Saxon documents. So we're going to discuss each of them. Now, at present, people who study medicine, doctors, students, researchers, well, they have a hard time memorizing, I must say, all this information related to, well, various types of medicines. Guess what? The Anglo-Saxons also had difficulty. So what did they do? They took them up in the form of poems. They resorted to rhyme and rhythm so that, the herbologists would be able to remember the uses better. So we are going to look at a few verses which talk about the uses of some of these herbs. So, mugwort. Now, what you're seeing basically is, believe it or not, this is English language. Okay, this is English language in its earliest form in the Anglo-Saxon script, and I understand that it would be difficult for a lot of you to read this. So, what I'm going to do is I would be providing a rough translation. So I've given the image so that you can recognize and look up using the scientific name. So mugwort, basically this is what is told about it. Singular, you are called oldest of the herbs. You could avail against 3 and against 30. You could avail against poison and against contagion. You could avail against the hated things that fare throughout the land. Now, the hated things that fare throughout the land, basically this herb referred to its use against snake bites. So, hated things would refer to snakes because people were living in the midst of nature and snakes, would often be a danger to them. So, a lot of these herbs relate to snake acting as antidotes from snake bites, as mentioned. Okay, I am certainly not advising people over here to apply these herbs if they suffer from snake bites. I obviously advise people to run away from snakes, do not have a bite. So let's look at the next one. Wade red. This was called the mother of herbs. And this particular herb was supposed to prevent against some sort of superstitious beliefs. So if you would be using it, then you would be kind of protected. Okay, so for example, this was used at wedding ceremonies as protection, and this again is an antidote to poison. And quite interestingly, this verse says that it is against those hateful things that flew throughout the country. That's what the last line says. Now, hateful things that flew throughout the country might be a reference to bats, might be a reference to other insects which would be flying, and if they could bite, then they would cause serious infections. So this was used against infectious wounds. Watercress or hairy bittercress was used as an all-powerful herb for various purposes. So it didn't have any one purpose. So this is what is stated about it. Watercress is named this what she on stone waxes, stands she against venom, dasheth she against pain. So this was a kind of painkiller also. And because it grows near the stones, stiff she is named. Okay, so quite interesting. Such a delicate herb would be called stiff, and it would be acting as a painkiller in those times. Bethany, which is quite commonly known now, well, this basically is supposed again to fight against the snake and against poisons in general. So this can avail against poison, against contagion, against hated things that fare throughout the land. So you can understand that there wasn't really much variety in these Anglo-Saxon herbs. A lot of these herbs were multifunctional, okay, and you can obviously relate to the times. Mayweed, this again, it was an all-purpose herb. It didn't serve any one purpose. It was used for several occasions, several purposes. Nettle is, grown. Even today, you see it all around, and it might be hard to believe that this was supposed to have medical values, but it was. So this basically is the herb that was called crab apple, and it basically, this is what the document says, the verse says, that this is poison by itself, but it acts as a poison against poison. So if somebody has got maybe food poisoning or any other form of poison, snake bite or anything, at that time only should this herb be taken. So this was taken only when the person suffered from poisons and not as a protection. Okay, it was more of a prevention, a poison against poison. Now you've all heard an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, right from the Anglo-Saxon times, the apple was used as something which would heal. Okay, so the apple, now the Anglo-Saxons and the Celts, they were basically pagan, but it is quite interesting to note that the verse talks about the apple in connection to the serpent, quite similar to that of the serpent deceiving Eve with what is supposed to be an apple, although the Bible doesn't mention the apple explicitly. So we can see that, well, this image of the apple associated with the snake is there across cultures. These are two herbs which are mentioned in pairs, Chevril and Fennel. So the first one, the picture that you see over here, is that of Chevril. So we are first going to see what is mentioned about that. It stands against pain, dashing against poison. It can avail against 3 and against 30, against the fiend's hand and against destruction, against the bewitchment of wicked creatures. So this is where this becomes quite interesting, because this herb is supposed to protect against witchcraft. So if somebody tries to put a spell on you, this is going to work against that, protect you from being charmed. So you can understand that, well, doctors in those days, the herbologists in those days, the druids of the times, believed that you could be charmed by others. Okay. The next one that we have here, this is Fennel. So this was against, it had a similar purpose. Okay, so if you are interested, you can definitely take a look around your garden and see if you can find these herbs, but please don't try to apply them believing that it would have the same results. We move to another time, the time of the Renaissance. So what do we have during the Renaissance? Well, think about it. This was still the time when there were witches who were hunted. And we have Reginald Scott, who I believe is important because he gives a very rational viewpoint. So he basically, in Discovery of Witchcraft, expresses skepticism. He regards magic and witchcraft as irrational and unscientific. He calls out to people, to physicians, that we should be able to distance ourselves from witchcraft and looking at rational explanation for things and of things. And he also blames some physicians who believe in witchcraft. Okay, so he calls them unskillful physicians, as I have given the quote from his book. Okay. So this book is quite important because although it says the discovery of witchcraft, it basically expresses skepticism, saying that, well, the witches are all ordinary women and they don't really have the power to harm. And there are other reasons why mishaps happen, and it is the duty of people, of doctors, of everyone in general, not to harm them. So on the one hand, it expresses skepticism against witchcraft, and on the other hand, it is also sympathetic to the victims, those who are labeled as witches, saying that they are ordinary people and they should not be persecuted. Okay. Now we move on to a very interesting and popular drama by Shakespeare, Macbeth. And although this is held as a drama which has a lot of political themes, well, there are a lot of mental health disorders which are there in Macbeth. So, believe it or not, Macbeth talks about schizophrenia, sleep disorders, OCD, that is obsessive compulsive disorder, hallucinations caused due to drugs. Now, obviously, we don't have these terms, schizophrenia and OCD, but we have the symptoms being described. So, let's look at what we find in Macbeth about schizophrenia. So, we have, now it is understood that hallucinations can be triggered by trauma or excitement. So if a person is already schizophrenic, a person who does not hallucinate but has got symptoms of schizophrenia, well, his symptoms can be triggered if he suffers from trauma, excitement, which is uncontrollable. And this is what we see in Macbeth. Macbeth is about to commit a murder. He's about to kill the king. And before he kills the king, he sees a dagger. And he realizes that this dagger is not there in reality. So this is what he says: art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat oppressed brain? Now, what Macbeth says over here is about daggers, but this, in effect, sums up all that is about all that can be said about hallucinations in general. So Macbeth talks about the dagger, but you can think that you can apply it regarding the nature of hallucinations, that it is not sensible to feeling, not sensible to sight, and it is there in the mind only. It is not there in reality, so it is a false creation, and it can be triggered when you are oppressed, when your brain is oppressed. Now, heat, in the Renaissance, heat was considered to be a fluid which would literally pass to the brain and press over there and cause fever and delirium. This drama also states that medicines can be used to control hallucinations. So at one point of time, Macbeth asks one of the servants to go and get a drink from Lady Macbeth, from his wife. So, go bid thy mistress, when my drink is ready, she strike upon the bell. This is what is told by Macbeth, and it is suggested by me and I believe others that this is where Macbeth is talking about something which he needs to drink as medicine, okay, to keep the hallucinations at bay. Unfortunately, he does not drink. He doesn't get the time to drink. It is not brought to him, and right after that, we have this hallucination. Okay, and it is now known that schizophrenic tendencies are manifested from childhood. Doctors have discovered that. But we see this in Macbeth during the banquet scene when Macbeth sees the ghost of Banquo and others can't see. And Lady Macbeth tells this to the others: my lord is often thus and hath been from his youth. So we have this, that schizophrenic tendencies can be there from early childhood. Well, what she advises next should not be followed. She tells that you should not regard him at all, just don't pay any attention to him. Now that should not be done, because if you do that, then, well, there's a great chance that these people might do self-harm. Okay. Macbeth also talks about sleep disorders. Now we all know that we need to get 8 hours of sleep every day, and this drama talks about the importance of sleep in maintaining overall health. So this is what Macbeth says regarding sleep. sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care, the death of each day's life, so labor's bath, balm of hurt mind. So think about it, so labor's bath. I remember during, a shoot session I had, that was during the lockdown time, and I had been standing for several hours shooting, and after that, back home my legs were paining because I ventured out after several months and was definitely not used to it because my legs were sore. And I obviously didn't take any painkiller. I slept, and in the morning, it was gone. So it is often advised that if you have got muscles which are sore, then sleep it off. It will get better in the morning. It obviously also cleanses our minds. As you know, during sleep we have certain neurotransmitters which release certain chemicals all over the brain, and it helps to cleanse the toxins which are piled up throughout the day. So balm of hurt minds, as we find Shakespeare to write, and the doctors are obviously going to put it in other words, but you can understand this to be potato. Great nature's second course. So if we don't sleep, we will not really be able to maintain good health. So this drama also talks about sleepwalking, somnambulism, and doctors, psychiatrists obviously say that people who suffer from these problems, they ramble. So I have seen first-hand account of patients who ramble because of these problems, and their memory is disjointed. So the events are not chronologically recollected. I've seen this happen with my grandfather, who was ironically a doctor. But anyway, doctors are also humans. They can have problems. So although the memory is not chronologically recollected when you have these problems, they are fused as per emotional relation and intensity, and that's what we find in Lady Macbeth. So if you watch a YouTube video about Lady Macbeth's speech, the sleepwalking scene, then you can see that whatever she says, they are emotionally related, if not chronologically related. Okay. So this drama also talks about obsessive compulsive disorder. And one of the most common forms of OCD is the washing hands. And we find this in Macbeth, again in the scene, Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking scene, when this nurse basically tells that, she does this, she washes hands, and she does this for full 15 minutes. And again, I have seen people who suffer from OCD, and I have known them to do this for about, this length of time. So it can be more, obviously, it can be less, but this is kind of an average. So you can see over here, the playwright William Shakespeare was also a good observer of the mental problems that affected man. This drama also talks about hallucinogens. So although Macbeth does not mention cannabis, it does state that there are certain roots and herbs which can cause hallucinations. So Banquo tells this to Macbeth after they see the witches and they disappear. This is what he says: "Have we eaten on the insane root that takes the reason prisoner?" And scholars have suggested that this can be hemlock, this can be mandrake, this can be henbane, and this might also have been wild mushroom. Okay, so we are never going to know it because Shakespeare has not specified, but we do have this mention that, there are certain herbs which can cause hallucinations. So Romeo and Juliet, let's come to this. A very popular drama, popular because of its romance, popular because of its tragedy. But this drama is one which also talks about drugs and how drugs can cause sleep, coma, or paralysis. So we have a Reverend Friar Lawrence, who basically gives a drug to Juliet, which is supposed to slow her pulse, and it paralyzes her for over 40 hours. So in a BBC article in 2014, it was suggested that this was nightshade, and it was suggested even earlier that a small quantity of this would cause madness, while a moderate dose would cause deep sleep or even death. So we don't just see the use of drugs to induce coma, sleep, or paralysis, but we also see that these drugs must be monitored, they must be regulated, and if you exceed the dose, then they can be fatal. So drugs can heal, drugs can be fatal because it depends on the dose. So we have the dosage of drugs being suggested over here in this particular text. Let's move on to another age of English literature, the Romantic Age, and we obviously think about William Wordsworth. Now, not many people, a lot of people know that William Wordsworth loved to write about nature, but not many people know that he basically had a nervous breakdown as a result of the events of the French Revolution and all the events that were happening after that, all the atrocities, the bloodshed. And he was a believer of the earlier age, the New Classical Age, which was an age which talked about restraint of emotions, and he grew up believing that, and he saw this atrocity. He believed that man, whatever man does is for the good, and then he ends up seeing this. He suffers from a nervous breakdown. So now when people suffer from nervous breakdown, they're obviously advised to go on a vacation, to take a break. Friends Ross and Rachel style. Anyway, so Wordsworth also took a break. He took a break from civilization, and he was restored back to health thanks to his vacation. Okay, and we see this in Tintern Abbey. This is what he says about nature. Nature never did betray the heart that loved her. 'Tis a privilege through all the years of this our life to lead from joy to joy. For she can so inform the mind that is within us, so impress with quietness and beauty, and so feed with lofty thoughts that neither evil tongues, rash judgments, nor sneers of selfish men, nor greetings when no unkindness is, nor all the dreary intercourse of daily life shall e'er prevail against us, or disturb our cheerful faith that all which we behold is full of blessings. And it is not unknown that going on a vacation reduces our stress hormones, so we need to reduce our cortisols, and going on a vacation helps that. Okay, and we have, at this time of pandemic, this is much needed, obviously with care and caution. Let's move on to another text, Frankenstein. Well, this is a story which many people know, and they, well, do not know also, because a lot of people are under the impression that Frankenstein is the name of the monster, but that's not really so. Frankenstein is actually the name of the scientist. The creature is unnamed. It is not right to call the creature a monster, certainly not in the postmodern times. But a lot of people do not know that Frankenstein is more than the horror that meets the eye. So Frankenstein is based on experiments that were conducted in the times. So we are all familiar with Galvani's experiments with a frog, and then he came up with this idea of animal electricity. The movement of the frog's limbs led to this idea of animal electricity. Now, this idea is not really accepted in modern times, as you know, but it paved the way for his nephew, who decided that I'm going to take it up from the frog to a human being. And there was this criminal who was executed, and Aldini decided that I'm going to attempt to rejuvenate him. So this is what, to the left, I have given this information which is given from the Times newspaper. Okay, so let's read what they state. On the first application of the process to the face, the jaw of the deceased criminal began to quiver. The adjoining muscles were horribly contorted, and one eye was actually opened. In the subsequent part of the process, the right hand was raised and clenched, and the legs and thighs were set in motion. So, those of you who have watched films of Frankenstein, you have seen, well, the depiction in a similar manner. So, Mary Shelley took the experiments which were happening at the time, and she wrote Frankenstein based on these experiments. So we are entering the times when, physics enters medicine. Okay, right now in any lab, in a hospital, we are relying on machines which use physics. So here we have electricity being used to resurrect people, and not just Aldini, but Shelley also took from Erasmus Darwin's experiments. So I have given the quote from Darwin. So this is what Erasmus Darwin states. There is therefore no absurdity in believing that the most simple animals and vegetables may be produced by the congress of the parts of decomposing organic matter. And he goes on to state a few other things. Now, to the right in the box, I have mentioned the words of Mary Shelley. Okay, so this is what Mary Shelley states. They talk, by they she refers to Percy Shelley and Lord Byron. So Mary, Percy and Byron, they were together, and they were basically thinking, they were having this little exercise of who can come up with the most horrifying story. Clearly Mary Shelley won the prize. Anyway, so this is what she states. They talked of the experiments of Dr. Darwin. By Dr. Darwin, Erasmus Darwin is meant. And then she says this: I speak not of what the doctor really did, or what he said, or said that he did, but as more to my purpose, of what was then spoken of as having been done by him. And this is what she says towards the end. Perhaps the component parts of a creature might be manufactured, brought together, and endued with vital warmth. So, see what Erasmus Darwin states. As the genus did not previously exist, which accounts for the endless varieties as well as for the immense numbers of microscopic animals, so she takes from Darwin and applies that in another context. Darwin does not really talk about it in the way in which Mary Shelley mentions. So she is able to take an idea and apply it in another context altogether. And she's able to think, well, in her literature, more definitely than Darwin and Aldini. And you can obviously understand this is the scientific temperament, to be able to think critically, to be able to think analytically, to be able to take and apply something in another context and see how that is applicable, and if changes need to be introduced, what changes need to be introduced. So the world, as I think, gained a wonderful author, but sadly lost a woman of science in the making, isn't it? I hope you'll agree with me. Let's move on to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I just have one more to present, Dr. Jekyll, and after that I'll be talking about just one more. So this novel experiments with split personality disorder, which is clinically dissociative identity disorder, and that is characterized by the presence of two or more distinct or split identities or personality states that continually have power over the person's behavior. So, in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Robert Stevenson basically says this: man is not truly one but truly two. Even if I could rightly be said to be either, it was only because I was radically both. So, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, the good one, the bad one supposed to be very good, the other absolute evil personified, and all about alter egos coming to surface. So here, Stevenson links the personality types with conscience. And what is conscience but a cognitive process at work, and that is shaped by our ethical values ultimately. So this novel basically seeks to reconcile personality disorder, split personality disorder, by dissociating the personality traits into separate identities. So it basically says that let's have a house for each of these identities, and we haven't been able to come up with this yet, but this text is still a call for researchers, in future, if they are able to come up with something, come up with a medicine, come up with something which is able to make a person switch between the personality traits at will, then perhaps this can be cured, because none of these personality traits are alien, both belong to the same individual, and the problem is the person does not know when the switch happens, so there is memory loss. So if there can be advances in medicine, if there can be researches in this field which can definitely make a person switch with awareness, then it would be a person's choice, and the person would not have these memory problems, and it would be a disorder which would be very much in control. Now we are going to talk about Dracula, and Dracula is you know a lot about Dracula, and there has been a lot of vampire fiction lately. The Twilight Saga, the Vampire Diaries, the originals. I'm going through the Vampire Diaries right now, by the way. So this particular novel was written in 1897, and it was before the discovery of blood compatibility. So people only view this as this creature who drinks blood, but there is more to it than meets the eye. It talks about the transfusion of blood. Direct transfusion as Dracula does, and also medical transfusion as performed by Dr. Van Helsing. Okay, so James Blundell was one of the earliest successful performers of blood transfusion in the early 19th century, and he basically recounts the problems of transfusion, that the patients suffered from fever, headache, and there were these problems, and blood has been identified to be vital for life. So if you look a bit below, then you're going to see this. The patient expresses herself very strongly on the benefits resulting from the injection of the blood. Her observations are equivalent to this, that she felt as if life were infused into her body. Now, this is what is taken up by the author, who basically regards this drinking of blood with the continuity of life. So blood is held to be vital for life, the essential aspect for maintaining life, and this is what is suggested by Blundell. But with the intake of blood, she felt as if life were infused into her body. And we also have Jennings transfusions, which documents the best practices of the times. The picture which I have given is basically the apparatus that was used at that time. Okay, it was a siphon for intravenous injection and a modified form of cannula. So the siphon features a vessel that holds a saline solution that he believed could act as a blood supplement, as well as a bifurcated tube that can transport the solution as well as blood from a donor. So I'm I'm coming to the end of this presentation. So there's a lot which students and teachers, researchers can take from this collaboration between literature and medical sciences. So each can interpret the text, and obviously the doctors and medical professionals can be more relaxed if they read these texts, and students of literature should be able to read the text beyond the mere plot of literature and place them in the historic context in which they were written. Okay, so it helps the students of each discipline to think out of the box, to make them gain a broader perspective, and it obviously fosters interdisciplinary research, as I just told, with reference to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Okay, and it obviously calls for a better representation of medical sciences in literature for future writers. So it is obviously hoped that future filmmakers would be making more films from literature, and if they do, they're going to make better representation of the medical sciences once they are aware of its history. And I hope that future authors will be able to explore the field of medical literature and give something more interesting to read to the present and future generations. Okay, so I have come to the end of my presentation, and I hope that you have enjoyed it. Thank you. I believe I have overstepped my time.
Thank you, sir. It was indeed a very informative and interesting talk. I'm sure that your justification and logistical explanations were grasped and ingrained in the participant. Your judgment on the given topic is very inspiring, and we are inspired a lot. I hope you will continue to guide us in the future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
For our third session, we have three eminent personalities, Dr. Eric Smith, Dr. Tommy White, and Dr. Lionel de Souza. So I would like to introduce them. Amongst them, the first speaker is Dr. Eric Smith. He earned his doctorate in business administration in 2019 from Walden University, where he specialized in social impact management. Sir is the author of He Broke My Fall, a book about recovering from failure. He is a financial education services consultant specializing in financial literacy and credit restoration. Dr. Smith, sir, enjoys helping other entrepreneurs launch their dream and remain sustainable with proven strategies beyond 5 years. He is a conference speaker and a motivator. Our second guest speaker is Dr. Tommy White. Sir holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Liberty University. Sir also holds master's degree in criminal justice leadership and executive management and a doctorate in business administration in entrepreneurship. Sir has been adjunct faculty at the University of People since January 2020. Dr. White is also currently teaching undergraduate and graduate courses and also serving his country by providing military services to the Air Force in the United States. Moving further, our third speaker is Dr. Lionel de Souza. Sir is a well-published and award-winning professor, philanthropist, and international education, healthcare, and pharmaceutical marketing professional. Sir is engaged in global higher education development and is actively involved in advancing the educational need of aspiring and deserving population worldwide. Dr. de Souza, sir, is the Executive Director of University Go Global, an organization that creates worlds of opportunities for students and universities towards one goal of expanding the frontiers and boundaries of knowledge and innovation globally. A very warm welcome to the speakers of our third session. A note for the participants that if you have any questions, you can post them in the YouTube chat box or in the in-call messages in Google Meet. To be successful, you have to have your heart in your business and your business in your heart. To give the next presentation on the topic, sustainability strategies and the businesses and social impact of the global pandemic on US small businesses, I would humbly request you all to take over the session. Over to you, sir.
Good morning. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. To this distinguished conference, really have enjoyed the last couple of days. Thank you for hosting such a wonderful conference. And to my esteemed colleagues, Dr. White and Dr. de Souza, good morning to you as well.
Good morning.
We're going to go ahead and do our presentation. I am Dr. Eric Smith, and I am joining you today from Atlanta, Georgia in the United States. And today we're going to be discussing sustainable strategies and the business and social impact of the global pandemic on U.S. small businesses. So our research results of the study in Southeast USA of successful sustainability strategy. Dr. de Souza, are you available?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you see the screen up there? My PowerPoint?
Let's see.
No.
It's not loading yet.
How about now?
Not yet, sir.
Okay, but okay, now it's going to do it.
Yes.
Okay, so let me see. How about now?
It's Axiom.
It is trying to do it.
Now it has appeared.
Okay, is it? It's not showing yet.
No, not yet.
Seeing it.
How about now? Just let me do it again, okay? Because any luck now?
I believe Dr. White is also trying to
Okay.
load.
So anyone, if he can get it out there.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, can you run a slideshow?
Screen sharing is started. Simply start with the presentation.
Can you see the screen on slides?
Not yet.
Your screen is visible. We just don't see the slides, colleagues.
Yeah, same.
Can you see the slides now?
No, not yet. Maybe we stop presenting and do it again. Okay, let me try now. You see it now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yes, I can see it now.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so sorry for the hiccups and the little delay. Our presentation today is on sustainability strategies and the business and social impact of the global pandemic small businesses. Presenting today are Dr. Eric Smith, Dr. Tommy White, and yours sincerely. So let us go further, and some of you must have attended our presentation yesterday, um, where we presented our results of Southeast United States and the successful sustainability strategies as compared with the findings from India. Well, we extended this research. That's what we want to present today. And in the phase one of this study, as we mentioned yesterday, we conducted interviews to explore the sustainability strategies of small businesses in the United States, the southern United States. And what we found is what we are presenting quickly in 2 slides. Some of it which you have heard yesterday, but overall, there were 12 important findings, and as quickly as possible, we found that most of these businesses that managed to thrive and survive, they leveraged communication technologies quite adeptly. We found that most facilitated remote employee company engagement by using some of the latest communication technologies like Skype and so on. And importantly, in these times of turmoil, they treated their employees as valued resources. Organizations have to be lean and mean, and so the emphasis was on really prioritized organizational engagement. No organization can survive if they are not cognizant of their financial well-being and the returns on investment. So we found this awareness to be very, very critical as these companies demonstrated that. We saw some of the strategies they used, those in the first-hand interviews that we conducted. And just by way of knowledge, the Southeast United States is Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia, so on, and including Louisiana and Alabama. So these were some of the 5 important findings, and this was phase 1 of the research. I will turn it over to the next slide, and Dr. White will talk about the balance of
all this, just like Dr. de Souza was saying, we had 12 points. Employees had to be creative and innovative within a business due to the pandemic. They also had to keep the employees engaged over time. You know, as the transition goes, you got to keep your employees engaged. Increase efficiency and reduce waste. Engage with stakeholders in the community. You still have to, even though the pandemic is going on, you still have to communicate with the community and your stakeholders with that business. Leverage digital technology and enhance social media presence. Social media is a big thing now, so businesses have to continue to improve and utilize social media as an advantage.
Okay, yes, absolutely. So social media, even I've interviewed people in Nagpur, and they have mentioned the remarkable difference being on Facebook has done to their business. So phase 2, some of this was discussed yesterday, but phase 2 is what we did. We asked business owners, what is it? What are the critical success factors? What is critical to start or run a business? And their responses is what we're going to present next. You know, a lot of us, whether we are students or faculty, many of us have business aspirations and we want to try and start our own business. You know, the internet has leveled the playing field. There are many more opportunities, but there are the caveats, the cautions, and some of those things are what we learn from these owners of small to medium-sized businesses. Just to mention, in the United States, they provide a lot of resources to new and aspiring businesses as well as the established ones. So anyhow, so slide number 4 is what we continuing on what we heard and learned, and I would hand it over. No, so what we found that first thing, the first emphatic requirement, what they told us was a business must create a business plan, especially startups. Whether you want to be the next tycoon or just be one of the mom and pop kind of businesses, you must write a business plan. And in that conduction and writing of a business plan, you must conduct a SWOT analysis. So what does SWOT mean? SWOT means study both yourself or your business and the people and personalities involved or going to be involved, and assess critically strengths, weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats, not only in your own sphere, but also in the external environment where you would be running your business. Do a reality check. Calculate the cost to start and run the business. If you are a new business, then how would you manage to get funding for the initial startup? If you are an established business, hopefully you've got the returns on investment and you have the revenue generation that will be necessary for continued business functioning. So again, this is one of the fundamental aspects of running a business, whether it is a startup or an established. There's efforts are needed. It reminds me of an art form in the United States called blues. The saying is that you've got to pay your dues if you want to sing the blues. An old blues singer from the 1930s, Bessie Smith, said that. And in later years, Ringo Starr from the Beatles in his solo career said, and it don't come easy. So the same thing applies to businesses. You have to put in the effort diligently, analytically, compile this information, and so on. Dr. Eric?
So it's very important that we understand, the nature and the impact that small and medium-sized businesses make in an economy. Here in the United States, small and mid-sized businesses are significant drivers of the economic growth and job creation and new innovation. As a matter of fact, around 29 million businesses in the United States have fewer than 500 employees. Yes, so we here in the U.S. consider a business that has 500 employees still a small business. And about 29 million businesses exist, which represents 99.7% of all the businesses and almost half of the total private sector employment here in the U.S. So you can see that it is very important that these small businesses have sustainable strategies so that they are not making a huge impact on our society here in the U.S.
Thank you, Dr. White. Yes, so another stat is that the vast majority of small businesses do not survive past, say, 5 years. So therefore, and invariably the reason is some of the things listed on the slide, that they haven't put in the due diligence, the intelligence, the assessment of the market, done the SWOT analysis, and so on. And we're going to talk about that due diligence next. So, Dr. Tommy?
With that, with due diligence, you got to use market research. So therefore, you got to evaluate the market. Evaluate the market. See what's out there. What are you competing against? Different competitors. What type of marketing you going to be using? What targeted audience you going to be reaching out to? You're going to monitor the consumer trends. Improve your business idea. So you go look at the trends of the consumers, or what do they like, what they don't like. Go reduce risk even at early stages. So you want to minimize, as small business owners, you don't have the luxury as a large corporation. So therefore, you got to want to reduce your risk as soon as it starts from startup from day one. Gather demographics in your geographical location, the population, your age, and the income and wealth.
Yeah. So getting a full kind of understanding of the demographics of the population would help you to formulate your marketing strategy, because consumers today, it's a consumers market. Consumers dictate the fortunes and success of a company. And if you don't have this information, then you may be setting yourself up for failure. So compile all this information. If you have to delay your starting of the business by a month or two, don't hesitate to do so. Don't neglect, however, this important diligence. And that is the importance of business intelligence and comparative analysis. So, so you conduct the comparative analysis, know who your competition is, and you should know what size of the market they have. Let's say if you have Baidyanath of the Ayurvedic market, you should be able to know how many players are there in competing in that market. If there's Himalaya Drug Company, if there's Baidyanath, what's the size of the market in crores? And if you're a small business, then you know that you should play by the rules and be adventurous, innovative, but also know that you're going to be competing against bigger players, other competition. So learn from your competition, learn who they are targeting, so you will get an idea of potential and existing customers. And importantly, define what would help your business to stand out, to be a competitive advantage over the others. And even a small business can offer the consumer or the customer some advantage, which will automatically kind of create those revenue flows if done properly. So again, identify your competition by product line, service, and market segment. No shortcuts to this. Okay, Eric, would you talk about the other side?
Yes, so just to further elaborate, differentiating your business from another business is very important. And so one of the powerful tools that is available to small business startups is Porter's 5 forces. Understanding, if there are any threats or barriers to new entrants into the business, and bargaining power of their suppliers, the number of sizes of suppliers for the different business that you're trying to start up. Is there a threat of substitute products? Are you offering something now that the customers may find in a different time and say, hey, I'd rather use this product than your product? Knowing the propensities of your consumers to substitute your product from someone else is something very important when deciding to go into your own business. I want to elaborate a little bit on rivalry. You may have a great business idea, but if there are a lot of competitors in that arena, what is going to differentiate your business? And is the industry that you're involved with, is there opportunity for growth, or has the industry become stagnant? And if you start the business, what is your exit strategy? Is there a way for you to get out from under the business, either through selling it or either expanding and branching off into other arenas? How easy is it for other people to get into the industry that you're in? Are there any barriers? Is there brand loyalty? Are you trying to offer something against Tide, which is a detergent business that is the #1 seller in the world, or are you trying to replace them? What is their brand loyalty with the businesses? And then the power of the buyers, the last thing I want to hit on, is the number of customers. How many people are there in the market that you're looking to get into that would even be willing to buy what you're wanting to sell? These are very important things to understand in your business.
And thank you, Dr. Eric. First of all, Porter's 5 forces is just a recommendation. You can adopt any approach which spells the same thing, that is due diligence, market intelligence, competitive intelligence. Porter gained importance because he was a Harvard professor in the 1970s, and talked about these five forces, which makes sense. So this is power and so on. And whereas you still have to do the SWOT and understand your own strengths and weaknesses of yourself, and if you have any other associates in the business.
So that is why it is important that you're asking key strategic questions. And there are some important data that you want to collect when trying to make your decision. What is the demand for your product? If there is no demand for the product that you're looking to sell, then it's probably more likely that's not a good fit for you. How many people would be interested in your offering? What are the economic indicators? Where are you looking to locate your business? Is the market that you're in saturated? How many similar options are there already available to your consumers? And then how are you going to price the product? What are your consumers willing to pay? And adaptability, what knowledge and data is vital to keep up with the latest consumer and business trends. So you don't want to just haphazardly start a business. There are some key questions that you want to ask and some data that you need to collect if your intent is to be successful. As my colleague, Dr. de Souza had mentioned, the average small 50%, more than half of the businesses fail within the first 5 years. And so if you want to push yourself in a position where your business is going to be still in existence beyond 5 years, then it's very important that you ask these questions and seek the answers through the data collection phase to see where you're strong and where you're lacking and need some improvement.
Yes, and go out there and try and fulfill and try to make that idea and dream a reality, but it also presupposes that you would do the due diligence. And so let's turn on, and again, these were some of the answers that we got from interviewing those 5 business experts in the Southeast United States. So I think they were quite revealing. We learned a lot. So summarize, to start a business, Dr. Tommy, would you talk about the 5 tips?
So the 5 tips that we're going to discuss when you don't have no money at all or little money. You're going to redefine your idea. You're going to brainstorm. You big companies like Walmart or Amazon, they got the money to do that. But as a small business owner, you don't have that money just starting out. Write a business plan. Conduct your market research. Business plan for a small business owner is very paramount. Access your finances. What can you start out with? Is you going to need ties into secure managing funds? Are you going to need loans? Are you going to have angel investors? How you going to get the money to start your business? Keep tabs on your expenses. And, keep a track of how much you spend starting out 500, or, then you do your monthly expenses. You spend over 1,000. So you got to figure out where that other extra $500 went to. So basically keeping track of your money is very paramount with a small business.
Yeah, and fortunately, we have all tools to track and keep tabs on the expenses. We have Excel and other kind of software that can help us. So again, try and get as technologically savvy as possible, and don't overspend. Keep within your limits. So the simple formula is to break even. To break even means no profit, no loss. That should be the immediate goal, and thereafter to turn the business around and make a profit. So the simple formula is fixed costs divided by the average price minus the variable costs is the break-even point. So again, to do those calculations, you might have to run a few simulations, what if kind of scenarios, and get those answers. Do a pilot test, run of the business in a small setting and see what is the outcome. So Break even is the minimum performance of the business to avoid losing money. And it also helps you to understand where the profits will come from and to set your goals. So determine how much you need to sell to be profitable, and ask yourself, how can I reduce my overall fixed costs? How can I reduce the variable costs per unit? And how can I improve sales? So these are some of the essentials that are consistent with the business prudence, the systematic thinking, and it probably is reflective of successful business people as well. So what did we learn from um, this study, Dr. Eric?
So, COVID has adversely affected business operations all around the world, not just in the United States. It is a true global pandemic. And so what we've learned from our study is that every business needs to learn and adapt in order to remain sustainable. You know, businesses that refuse to adapt die. Innovate or die is a common statement that is made. And so it's very important that businesses take the opportunity to learn and adapt and to communicate, keep the flow of communication not only with the employees and employers, but also to the stakeholders, the consumers, those that are in the same industry, so that you're well abreast of the different trends that are going on. And then innovate and formulate and implement the strategies. There are so many different strategies that businesses can undertake in order to remain profitable. But it's very also important that we don't just learn those strategies, that we implement those strategies. Because what may have worked prior to the pandemic may not be working now. And the new business normal now may not what's going to sustain us in the future. So it's very important that we're always constantly innovating and formulating different strategies, and that we're implementing them to stay on the cutting edge. And to display empathy and caring for employees. After all, if we are a business owner and we have people that are working for us, we want them to stay with us. During times of turmoil, people like stability and to know that they have a sense of belonging. And so one of the things that I like about a qualitative study is that you're able to pick up on those feelings and those impressions that maybe a quantitative study may not have been able to provide. And so it's very important that as business owners, as professionals, that we are able to display empathy and caring for others.
Yeah. So in contemporary life, ongoing learning and continuous improvement, these are really unavoidable. I mean, if we want to thrive and survive in a cutthroat, highly competitive market, these traits should be either developed if we don't have them, but it is possible to learn and keep that in mind. Okay, so a business has other kind of responsibilities also. So, Tommy, would you talk about what these would be?
First one's engage and involve the community. You're going to develop community partnerships. That's the only way, keeping your business afloat. Contribute to positive social change. Give back to the community. I know with this pandemic, a lot of businesses has closed, but continue to, build relationships with your different partners in the community. Enhance communication within enterprise and externally. Persevere diligence to overcome challenges. This pandemic has caused a lot of challenges with many businesses, but it's not going to last forever. So therefore, got to still persevere. Keep your employees engaged. Let them know that we go eventually get back in, back and up and running. Share knowledge. Some businesses come together, and what may work before the pandemic is not going to work during the pandemic while this pandemic is going on. So business owners continue to share knowledge with each other. Optimize business performance through innovation. Embrace change, because when I was doing my study and I found my doc study, I found out a lot of small business owners don't like that change, and that's where they hurt themselves at. They don't want to adapt and learn new things, and displays in blending technology and human capabilities.
Yeah. So the thing is that if you engage with the community, automatically you are expanding your market. More people know about your business, and they're more likely to be supportive. So you're getting some free PR, public relations, leverage technology, social media. Again, a woodworking business in Nagpur has told me, I interviewed him, and he has mentioned that his business exponentially increased when he started getting involved in with the community through social media and other such channels and platforms. So all this is very fine. I know we are talking to a student audience. And now, what does this mean if you're a student or a professor? It means that this knowledge has to be applied. There's no sense in having this knowledge, and this knowledge comes through diligence, as we talked about. So there are three quotes there. If it is, if knowledge is useless without consistent application, and success is the uncommon application of common knowledge. So if you look at Steve Jobs, somebody who kind of gave the consumer what they could never dream of and imagine, and the rest is history. You see, smartphones have revolutionized everything, and they've put other businesses like watches, wristwatches, and alarm clocks out of business, cameras, and so on. Now, the thing is, you can apply this knowledge even academically, and the same principles rather. So if you strive to acquire deep knowledge in the discipline of your study, it doesn't matter whether it is botany, zoology, chemistry, computer science, whatever it is, go beyond the superficial knowledge. Pursue a systematic quest for excellence, because if you're a subject matter, you will find future opportunities in applying this knowledge in doing your master's or doing your doctoral study or whatever it is. Disseminate knowledge. Knowledge should never be kept to oneself. That is very selfish. If we can disseminate this knowledge in the community and in student partnerships, it'll do wonders to our own businesses, our own capabilities, and our own strengths. So use curriculum, technology, and the internet resources to be a subject matter expert. Commit to excellence and be that subject matter expert you are capable of. Everybody has the power to be that subject matter expert or the expert in your own field. Never believe that you're not as good as somebody else. Everybody is unique and can be the expert in their own special way. So commit to excellence, and you will expect to reap rewards of success in academic and professional life. One very important thing is develop command over expression and subject. We had two excellent speakers talking on English, from the background in English, Shakespeare and so on. So it is priceless to develop that command over your language. Whether you're expressing yourself in the classroom, in submitting your assignments or the examinations, if you develop that vocabulary, that command over expression and subject matter expertise, you won, let's say, half the battle. So on that note, I would like to thank our distinguished audience of professors, most importantly, our students, our principal, Dr. Thomas, Dr. Dilip, and all the other professors and students. It's been a pleasure. On behalf of Dr. Tommy and Dr. Eric, I would like to once again thank you, everybody, for listening and being present for this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful session. Through this session, we learned that struggle and growth come only through continuous efforts and struggle. Thank you, sir, for sharing your hard-earned knowledge with all of us.
Thank you, Sally. It was a pleasure, really, and thank you for doing such a wonderful job in in coordinating this event. So once again, Sayali, thank you very much, and
Yes,
thank
sir.
everybody else.
Thank you, sir. I take this opportunity to thank our management and principal, Dr. K.T. Thomas, sir, for arranging such vital session for us. I would like to express my gratitude to our speakers for taking out time from the busy schedule and for enriching us with their expertise and knowledge. I would like to thank our organizing and technical team for their help and support in making this program a success. Last but not the least, a heartfelt thank you to our dear audience. A request to all the participants to fill the feedback form using the link shared on respective WhatsApp groups, Google Meet chat box, and YouTube live chat. We have come to the end of today's program. We will meet tomorrow for another interesting and engrossing session. Until then, stay safe, stay at home. Thank you.
Thank you.